So I mentioned before we started that or at the beginning today, we have a guest joining us. She is going to join us, I believe. She's traveling. I believe she's going to join us on camera. Her name is Rebecca Friedrichs, and she has joined us in the show before. She's an author. She wrote the book Standing Up to Goliath, but she's also a woman. She was a California public school teacher who became the named plaintiff in a case challenging some of the rules and regulations and restrictions of the teachers' unions in this country. Case got all the way to the Supreme Court. She has, in that battle, become a public spokesperson on behalf of teachers and on behalf, really, of American families and students who want their children to have the best experience they can in public schools. She speaks truth about the consequences, the actions, the motivations of teachers' unions in this country. So I believe we have Rebecca online. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Great to see you. So glad we could do this today. So I gave a little bit of an introduction. I believe you heard. Did you hear what you did?
Well, I did, and I'm so delighted because Miss Virginia is a personal friend, Virginia Walden Ford, and her courageous battle for the children is inspiring. I hope everyone sees the movie. And since you were unaware, there's actually a website, and I wish I had the name of it memorized. I don't remember if it's missvirginiamovie.com or what it is, but folks can go to that website and they can actually watch that movie via multiple platforms. And I think they pay a few bucks and can stream it right into their homes. Recommend it highly. And those students you heard speak, they are inspiring. My guess is that was supported by the American Federation for Children, right. AFC, also a wonderful group. And so I believe you can also find out about Virginia's movie on the AFC website, American Federation for Children.
You can, so actually. That was the organization that sponsored this event I went to. And I do actually have, I should have said, my very fine listeners, it is missvirginiamovie.com, missvirginiamovie.com. I didn't know you could see it there, but in any case, you can read about it, and you ought to get to see it, because I think that I dislike so much an issue of such great importance seeming to be approached as a political issue like any other, and this side says X, this side says Y, real life kid stories. But you know all about that, real life kid stories. So I would love to start with, if we could, Rebecca, if you could just tell our listeners in a summary way what the case was that you took all the way to the Supreme Court on your behalf as a public school teacher.
Sure. Well, speaking of real life kid stories, so I was a 22-year-old student teacher, and I was learning how to be a teacher and had this incredible master teacher. But next door to us was a woman who was actually, in my opinion, abusing the children. She would grab them and scream at them and yank them. And I just thought that was so wrong. And I discovered that the only reason she still had a job was that teachers' unions were defending her. And I thought that was wrong. So when I signed my first contract, I said, no, thank you. I don't want to be in a union. And I was told, well, you don't have to be a member. You don't have to join, but you have to pay fees to us and you have to accept our monopoly bargaining. So I taught in California public schools for 28 years. And throughout that entire experience as a teacher, I worked with these incredible, loving teachers. All we want to do was deliver a great experience to children and serve families. And we were being politicized, and the politics got worse and worse every day. And the unions fought against school choice. They brought in curricula that is damaging to our students, like this radical sex ed, and turning our kids into social justice warriors, and rewriting history and dividing us by color and by class. And it's really disturbing to teachers like myself. So we, 10 California public school teachers, sued the California Teachers Association and the National Education Association. And as you mentioned, our case with the Supreme Court, here was the basis. It was a first case. Our argument was this: teachers and all employees should not be forced to fund a union. We shouldn't be forced by a coercion or bullying or anything else, or by law, to fund a union. It was a violation of our First Amendment rights to free speech and freedom of association. And so our case was heard. We were poised to win with a 5-4 decision. It was heard in January 2016. Justice Scalia died in February 2016, 1 month after our case was heard. So we ended up with a 4-4 deadlock decision. But thankfully, another case came behind our case and won on my birthday in 2018. And so now all government employees who are in unions, whether they feel trapped in them or not, they are no longer required to pay them 1 red cent.
Oh, it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's the reason you're on my show a couple times previously. We've talked about this idea of standing up for the individual rights of teachers to not be coerced by a union and not to have to pay dues, especially when the union is doing things politically that you don't agree with. You're forced to pay dues so they can run out and spend them supporting candidates or issues that you don't. So I love that you did that. So you're like a freedom fighter. Love that. Okay. Yeah. So you have a website now, and I think it's called For Kids and Country.
Yes, forkidsandcountry.org.
Yep, and I looked at it today, and I realized there are so many more issues than there is time, as is always the case. So I know you've become just an outspoken warrior. You've had amazing experiences speaking in all sorts of venues and with famous political people, and really getting out there in the world talking about defending, and it's defending the right of teachers to teach and kids to get the best education that they can. Is that a good summary?
That is absolutely right. And just fighting for this free republic, because we have the greatest country in the world, and our schools were never meant to be, quote, public schools. They were meant to be run by local communities, including parents and teachers and faith leaders. And that's how they were run for decades and decades in this country, until unions showed up and undermined our values, degraded my profession, and have been bringing damage to our students. And what a delight that I've gotten to speak to all these incredible leaders across the country, including President Trump, miraculously. Only God could do that. I'm a kindergarten teacher. So
yeah, yep. But go ahead. So tell us about meeting President Trump. That's pretty fun.
Oh, yeah, it was great. You know, what I can say to people, what a wonderful person. When we walked into the room and we were all waiting, we were in the cabinet room just outside the Oval Office, and we didn't know exactly when he and his cabinet would enter, but we were in there talking with some other legislators, and we had some of these wonderful students in the room with us who have benefited from educational freedom scholarships in Wisconsin, like the kids you met, but also in other states. And a wonderful Down syndrome young man who had benefited from the scholarships, and his mother. And it was just so lovely. And the entire experience was positive. When President Trump walked into the room, he wasn't some, worship me kind of person. He walked in and said, "Oh, hey, everybody, sit down, relax, enjoy yourselves." And we talked to him for an hour. He was kind. He invited us in for pictures. And the best thing is when we told our stories about the desperate need for education freedom in this country, and when I shared with him that the unions are masquerading as teachers, they are not representing the teachers in this country. A very slim margin, 13% of teachers, according to National Education Association internal studies over 35 years, only 13% of teachers consider themselves decisively left. Most teachers, the majority of teachers, are conservatives. And so I told the president, look, we stand with you and Secretary DeVos for freedom, for educational freedom, for America's kids. And he looked at us and he said, let's get this done. So he and his cabinet are supporting educational freedom, where we would allow parents to make the decision and empower them to make the decision where their children go to school, whether that's homeschool, whether it's private school, whether they choose to go to their neighborhood charter or public school. Parental choice makes a lot of sense.
It sure does. In fact, I have a friend who works for AFC, and we've been talking about that a lot recently, about how school choice is a great term, but parental choice really kind of captures the issue better, because if you step back from it, why every parent, generally speaking, is who takes care of their children is making all sorts of choices. But with respect to schooling, we have somehow defaulted into government chooses your child's school. And so the better term instead of school choice, or the more term that resonates, is parental choice. Parents choose, as they do with all sorts of other things involved in their children's lives. But I want to jump into, I do want to get into Betsy DeVos in a moment, but I want to hit something about in California, because we read more and more of this, the radical LGBTQ agenda, especially transgender agenda, and the gender identity agenda has infiltrated all the way to the lowest grades in schools. And so I was reading about in California, where they had parents were protesting because they really didn't think their kindergartners ought to have any curricula that involves discussing gender identity. And I'm thinking, there was even a question, kindergartners? I mean, these kids, these are babies, to use the word I love to use about very small. These are babies. And the California schools are going to begin their gender identity education at the kindergarten level. And then throughout the lower grades, very young children, infiltrating the public schools with the agenda of the left of claiming that gender is a choice you make, like whether to have long or short hair, or whether to wear red or green as on your outfit today, that gender is a choice. These kind of ideas are being planted into the public schools by the left, and I saw there were parents protesting. So I'm sure you had involvement and thoughts about that. So what is your take on all that? How in the world did that happen, and what should parents do about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm one of the parents that's been protesting. So I live in California, and actually the boots on the ground parents who heard about this first are in my community. So we're the tip of the spear on this. And, your listeners need to know that it's the teachers' unions that are pushing this into our schools. It's not just the left in general. It's the unions. And as I said, they masquerade as teachers. And parents, you need to know this too. And I have a whole chapter about, well, actually I have 3 chapters on this sex ed in my book, and another whole chapter how the teachers unions bullied the PTA into a stance of neutrality. So the PTA is also standing behind this agenda. I do not know one parent who agrees with this agenda, and I do not know one teacher. And we're even working with some LGBTQ parents who are saying this agenda is not appropriate. So here's the problem. And it's hitting preschool too, Debbie. So I'm just going to give you an example of one of the things that they will say to our children. And this is not these are not lessons. Let's make this clear. This is not instruction. These are not lessons. This is indoctrination. Right. 100% indoctrination. Here's what they'll say. Teachers like myself are no longer allowed to say boys and girls. We're not supposed to say mom and dad. It's students, children, parents, because we can't assume anyone's gender. As a teacher, as a parent, and as a Christian, I'm going to say, how dare they attack my parental rights, my rights as a teacher, and the Bible itself, God, the God I serve, who created the male and female. So here's what they do. They come into the classroom and say, children, when you were born, your parents didn't know your gender, so they assigned you a gender. There's really a spectrum of unending number of genders, and someday you'll figure out your gender. And then at the same time, they teach these lessons that lead the children into believing that there are not just 2 genders. We are not binary. They teach the children that they are gender fluid and that they can change their gender at any time, however they're feeling. One day they can be a tree, the next day they can be a girl, the next day a boy, the next day. It is completely confusing indoctrination, and I'll say it, it's child abuse. And teachers like myself believe it's child abuse, and so do parents. And that's why we're speaking out. We've been fighting at the state level. We have been bullied and had state leaders, particularly our state Senate Education Committee, that is majority Democrats that are controlled by the teachers union. And we go in and we speak out as parents. We'll have hundreds of parents go to the microphone and teachers and say, we're against this, we're against this. And they pass it on anyway. And so they are pushing an agenda against the will of California parents. Please don't believe that everyone out there in California agrees with this stuff. We don't. We absolutely don't. And on all party lines, we don't. It's an agenda being pushed by radical leftists. The money's coming from teachers' paychecks through their dues and being pushed into our schools through the teachers' unions, the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Planned Parenthood.
So what do you do if you're a parent and you agree with, I think, most sane Americans that you know that there are two genders and you don't want the school getting in the middle of your training of your child and the school interfering with you as what you as parents trying to teach your children? What option or alternative do parents have when the public schools are teaching this in California? What can they do? What can the parents do?
The best thing they can do is pull them out. I taught public school in California for 28 years. The children in my class were safe and loved, and I never would have taught anything like this. But if teachers won't teach it, California is the first state to have this embedded in our law. And other states, Washington State just passed it. I can't even keep up. New York is looking at it. This is going to be nationwide because it's the teachers unions and powerful organizations that are behind it. So parents need to understand that our quote unquote public schools, we need to quit calling them those because they're not serving the public. They're government schools. And the government schools are run by the government unions and these other powerful organizations. So parents, when you drop your child off at the door of a government run public school, you just left your rights at the door. You don't have any rights. They can teach your kid whatever they want to teach your kid, whatever's been passed in the law. So in California, this is a law. So when we push back, they say, it's the law. There's nothing we can do. We have to teach this. And then many of these school boards are controlled by the teachers union, pushing this stuff. So the parents are really hitting a brick wall in many cases. In some cases, we're getting success because the school board is not controlled by the teachers union, but that's very few cases. So this is why I advocate so much for educational freedom, because I believe every parent should have all rights to protect their child, to teach their child. Every parent is their child's first educator and most important educator. You can homeschool. You can put your children in private school. The reason I support the education freedom scholarships that the Trump administration is trying to pass is because that would allow some government money to be moved so that if a person like myself made a donation toward a poor child being able to attend a private school, then I could get a tax credit for making that donation. And that's what the education freedom scholarships do, is they provide a tax credit for people to actually help children who are stuck in dangerous and low performing public schools. And the more this sex ed is pushed, and there's also some equity discipline policies where we can't discipline the kids anymore. A lot of schools are dangerous now, a lot of them. So it's an emergency. Parents, I recommend that you homeschool if you can. Get your kids out of those government schools. If at all possible, get on school board. Start speaking up in every way you can. And number one thing, every teacher you know who's a loving person, we have a program on our website for kidsincountry.org that we call Adopt a Teacher. It takes 3 minutes to read it. Just put your arm around every teacher you know and love. Get your pastors to stand up and put their arms around teachers. Adopt those teachers. They don't know they're funding this nightmare. They have no idea. If we could help teachers to know that, we've won them the right to stop paying for this. And so they just need to know they're not educated.
I was going to mention your Adopt a Teacher program. I love that because people can read your website, they can learn the information you share, and they still feel like, but I'm overwhelmed by what the school does. But as you say, many individual teachers are not on to this agenda. They are really forced into the agenda by the teachers' unions, which is shocking. I want to go back to something you said a moment ago. You mentioned the PTAs, and I was thinking, we were very blessed. Our kids went to a private religious school, but for public schools, I always had the notion that PTAs would be a place where parents could have their views at least known. But what is the reason PTAs can't be more impactful in these public schools in California and everywhere else?
Yes, this is a nationwide problem. You cannot trust what's going on at the state and national levels of the PTA, just like you can't trust the teachers' unions. So here's the quick summary. They can read more about this in my book. In the 1960s and 1970s, the teachers' unions, the National Education Association, started bullying the PTA. And the way they bullied them was the PTA was standing up against policies and ideas that the teachers' unions were pushing. So, for example, the teachers' unions wanted collective bargaining and they wanted to be able to strike. Why wouldn't a PTA want collective bargaining? Because when you have collective bargaining, the parents are removed from the conversation. So you have unions and union-funded government politicians and teachers who will benefit, union represented teachers who will benefit, all bargaining for taxpayer money, and the taxpayer is not invited to the table. So the taxpayer was removed from the conversation, and the PTA didn't think that was a good idea. They wanted parents to have a voice. They didn't think it was right for teachers to abandon children and go on strike. So they were standing against strikes. And the PTA even tried to concede. They said, look, we understand, okay, maybe you want to go on strike for whatever you need. Then let us parents man the classroom so the kids are safe. Let us help so that the school is not closed down. And so parents who have jobs don't have to, lose their jobs, leave work or not be able to pay their bills because you're on strike. The teachers union said, no way, because they can't control everybody and bully the taxpayer and the government into doing what they want if somebody's covering the classroom and taking care of the kids. So the the unions made it impossible for the PTA to stand up for what was right for the children. So the PTA kept pushing back. And the unions told teachers by using they always deceive teachers. They come in and tell us all these deceptions to get us to stand up against things we would normally stand for. And so they told the teachers, look, the PTA is, they're not standing with us, so you need to quit the PTA. Thousands of teachers left the PTA. The PTA was afraid that they were going to belly up. And so they caved and they took a stance of neutrality. And from that day, the PTA has never been allowed to take any stance in opposition to the teachers' unions. So no one is really looking out for the kids. Everyone, and no one, by the way, is looking out for the teachers. Everyone's looking out for the unions, union leaders, and their allies, which are far left organizations, and many organizations that used to be good and used to do some good things that have become very corrupted by the union money, like the NAACP, who's standing against school choice, against charter schools, even though most Black parents want charter schools. It's because they are in bed with teachers' unions and benefiting from those unions.
I have to tell you, I worked on a congressional campaign one time in a district that was majority Black, and that was one of the arguments. I was talking about the great virtues of school choice, and the people in the community were saying, "Oh no! The NAACP told us we shouldn't support school choice." And there was no logic to it. I don't know. I mean, the kids were being forced into these schools at all sorts of issues and challenges, and yet the what do you call it? Brainwashing, manipulation of organizations like the NAACP. Some Black parents thought they were defending their communities by opposing school choice. The most crazy thing. Okay, one last thing I want to hit with you, and then we talked a little bit about Betsy DeVos, but she is making strides to some degree, trying to support parents and school choice and all that. So you talk about the teacher unions. I think you wrote an article in Washington Examiner about it, but the teachers unions are especially targeting her because of her support of school choice. And you hear her criticized all the time. I want to ask you, why is she criticized? What's the teachers union's problem with her?
Yes, so I'm going to start my statement with this, because a lot of people who even believe in school choice and good, loving people attack Betsy DeVos because they believe the rhetoric. So let me first start with this. It is 100% the state and national teachers unions, whom I said don't represent real teachers like me. They represent themselves and their greed and their very, very far left socialist, really a radical socialist agenda. They are the people who are bad-mouthing Secretary DeVos. So just so you know that going in for your viewers. The reason they absolutely loathe Secretary DeVos and have inspired attacks on her from the day she was nominated. Yeah. Didn't even wait for her to be, to actually become Secretary of Education. They have attacked her from the very day she was nominated with vitriol and hate. I get the same kind of stuff on my social media, and I get messages that are very, very hateful from these people. Because if you dare to stand up and say that children deserve to have a safe and high quality education, and that their parents deserve to have a choice, and that those children shouldn't be trapped in government run schools. If you dare to say that, you're a target for state and national unions, because they're making money off our public schools, a lot of it. And the reason they have brainwashed so many parents, I've watched thousands of parents stand against school choice, against vouchers, against all kinds of school choice in my state, in California, because the PTA told them to, because the union told the PTA. And it's manipulation. And it's because the unions collect, when you add up the teachers and educators, the paraprofessionals, teachers' aides, the school nurses, when you add up everyone across the country who is paying dues just to the teachers' unions alone, it's almost $5 billion annually. That's with a B, $5 billion. And that's tax-free that they collect in dues money. And by the way, the taxpayer collects it for the unions through paycheck deductions and just hands it over to the unions. And they're using that money to push their agenda. They don't want to lose their power. They don't want to lose their ability to undermine this free republic and turn us into a socialist nightmare. And so that's why they hate Secretary DeVos, because she stands for what's right for children. And she's brave. What she's going through is unbelievable, and she stands tall because she's doing what's right for the kids and for the parents, and we're grateful to her for that.
Rebecca Friedrichs, I'm so glad you could join me today, and I'm glad we got you on video, too. It's great to see you. Her book, in fact, as you were speaking, realized I probably should have run upstairs before I left home and tried to grab it and have it to show our listeners, but it's called Standing Up to Goliath. Great book. Also, I want to urge people to go to your website, for kidsandcountry.com.
Org.
For kidsandcountry.org, great website. I also want to urge you to get into this battle in your area, in your kids' schools. The idea that there's something wrong with the movement to say that parents should get to control their kids' education. It is one of the many crazy arguments of the American left. The simple fact is we need kids to get quality education so they can emerge to be quality citizens in our country. We owe them the best education possible. We owe parents the right to control their kids' education. Rebecca Friedrichs, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been delightful.
Great to see you.